Hello there, everybody. So, with Samus Returns a little over a week after its initial release, comes the inevitable comparisons to the Another Metroid 2 Remake, or AM2R for short. So, while some people might think it's unnecessary or maybe even unfair to compare these games, a lot of people are just going to be doing it anyway. So, in the spirits of free debate, we're here to compare two very different remakes of the same game. So, with me as always is my partner in crime, Test Zero, or TZ, from Dragon's Lair Productions.
Hello.
Now, before we just get into actually comparing these games, we should probably point out that me and Zero have done like a separate full review of Samus Returns by itself as part of his Gamers Without Borders series. So if you're interested in just hearing our thoughts on Samus Returns, there should be a link in the description, or there will also be like an end card thing or whatever the hell they're called at the end of the video. But of course you are fully entitled to stay here and listen to us compare the Metroid. Simples. So I suppose we should start with our sort of first impressions of the two games. Because to be perfectly honest, I kind of felt like they both had a very similar sort of wow feeling to them when you first started playing them.
Yeah, you start because you first encounter these games. It's just as black and white, very. Even if you look at the graphical upgrade from Metroid 2, the original Metroid to Metroid 2, the game, it does look really good for being the original on the Game Boy. It does look very good for the limitations of the software, or limitations of the hardware. And then these games just kind of, they build it up from there. So they add in this color and they add in just these other things from what we've seen previously in the series.
Yeah, and of course both of them actually now have an opening right at the beginning, you know.
Right.
Both explaining like the history of what's going on and, you know, why Samus is on SR-388 killing Metroids. So, you know, that's nice. And both take actually kind of a similar take on it, actually. The intros, they're not identical, but they feel very much the same, I thought.
Well, because they are sort of telling the same story.
Yeah, so that's sort of understandable. And then, of course, you actually get into the game, and when you actually get like straight into the gameplay itself, I kind of felt like they had a similar feeling, but for different reasons when I was playing AM2R. And you can hear this if you watch my Let's Play, because I've got a full Let's Play. I did the game beginning to end, 100%. You can kind of hear that I'm just so happy to be playing a Metroid game again. Like, it was just like, it's Metroid. It's so good to be back. And there is a feeling of that in Samus Returns, but I do think it was slightly stunted by the fact that we already had AM2R.
Yeah, the wow factor is kind of hurt by the fact because this was the first either of them was the first Metroid game we've gotten in like 7 years.
Yeah.
The first like true, and even longer if you're talking side-scrolling Metroid games, because that goes back to Fusion.
No, it goes to Zero Mission.
Zero Mission was after Fusion? Right,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Zero Mission came out in, what was it, 2004?
I'll say three or four.
Yeah, I was going to say 2003, 2004. And so it's the first side-scrolling Metroid we'd had for a while. And that's kind of why, because, I mean, with AM2R, it uses the same graphical style as Zero Mission. So it really feels like, yes, this is a similar game, which is why it felt, it's so good to be back in the Metroid. But of course, Samus Returns does the 3D. So in that one, it's kind of like, wow, this actually feels kind of nice. You know, it's different, but in a good way.
Yeah, it feels like a logical progression of the series. It feels like what it would be like if they made a Metroid game in 2.5D, which we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
This is the first 2.5D Metroid game.
Yeah, it's kind of we've been saying there should have been a 2.5D Metroid for a long time. Like,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
ever since the 3DS came out, it kind of seemed like, yeah, Metroid would be the perfect game.
It doesn't even need to be 3DS. I would love to see this kind of style on the console.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. In fact, a lot of people are wishing, I think, that Samus Returns was on the Switch. A lot of people think that because the 3DS's lifespan is apparently ending, is it?
I don't know.
I don't believe so.
I do know they made it a regular 3DS game, not a new 3DS, because of the install base. They knew more people would play it if it was just a regular 3DS game.
Yeah, I can kind of understand that. And I don't think that's too much to the game's detriment in any way. I don't think it really affects the game in any real way. But a lot of people were saying they wished it was on the Switch, because apparently consoles are the only things where games should be released these days. So, yeah, just in general, I think both of them had that same sort of wow factor for different reasons. Like, the AM2R was like, it's good to be back in Metroid. Samus Returns was like, wow, it's nice to see it in 3D on a handheld.
Well, there was also the wow factor that AM2R was essentially made by one person.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, certainly for a good chunk of the game's development, I think he started getting help towards the end of the game's lifespan, which is just a sort of a real testament to just how much
of a labor of love the game was.
Yeah, exactly. And that is one of the things we'll probably get to later, but we could sort of talk vaguely about it now, is that because AM2R was definitely like a labor of fan love, whereas Samus Returns was a game essentially made by a corporation, if you will, they do have a very different tone to them.
Yeah, AM2R seemed to be a bit less
cynical,
user-friendly, a bit less newcomer-friendly.
Yeah, that is true.
Samus Returns does kind of hit you over the head with the tutorials, which is sort of par for the course for a lot of games.
Yeah, I mean,
these days.
At the end of the day, it is a Metroid. It is a Nintendo game, and Nintendo loves their tutorials. Yes, they love telling you something and then telling you again and then telling you even when you've asked them not to tell them. And yeah, that's an old joke of mine. So yeah, but basically, I think the sort of first initial impressions were good for both, I thought. And both also sort of moving on to like just general gameplay at large, both again felt very good. AM2R's felt very the controls feel very sort of snappy, which is one of the issues I have with Metroid 3 these days, is the controls are a little bit floaty.
I honestly like the floaty controls of Metroid more than the like really fast falling stuff, because I like being able to jump slowly in midair. That seems to be kind of very similar to the previous Metroid games. Metroid 1 and 2 were both very floaty. The later Metroid games like Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission, they were very a much faster gravity in those.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling that there's like, I think there is a split in the fandom for that kind of stuff. I think I like the heavier falling.
Samus Returns was fairly floaty too. I think it was sort of a good balance between.
Yeah, I kind of felt it was like halfway between the two, actually, Samus Returns. And I think that's kind of one of the differences in the flow of the game, is that Samus Returns, it feels very quick. Like, you can move left or right very quickly. And although Samus's movements across the screen were maybe slower in AM2R than they were in Samus Returns, because Samus moves really quickly, like when running. I think when it comes to like her general maneuvering, she's a little slower than she is in AM2R. Just sort of based on memory. I mean, I'm sure there's probably someone out there who's going to spend hours comparing the exact number of frames between the two different games. But I'm just going with my
three different games now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, technically 3 different games, but I'm just talking about the Samus Returns and AM2R.
Yeah.
One of the things in terms of gameplay is that gameplay of AM2R is very traditional Metroid. It's like, this is what Metroid is, so I'm not going to change it. Whereas, of course, Samus Returns introduces a few new elements, in particular the parry system, the melee counter-attack. Now, we talked about this at length in our other video, but I will just repeat myself here to say that the parry is way overused in Samus Returns, and I do think that is very annoying.
They introduced this new mechanic that it's obviously we're very proud of.
Yeah.
So they wanted to use it as much as possible, but yeah, they did go they were a bit too proud of it. They did use it a bit too much.
Yeah. Because it's like, it's great to use it against an enemy, and you do, when you start pulling them off successfully, like...
Yeah, it feels really good, because then it also rewards you with the Aeon, which is a nice little bonus on that. But mostly it's just the fact that you take these guys out and they're gone. They're not in your way anymore.
Yeah, but because every single normal enemy you encounter uses it against you the second they appear on screen, it very much interrupts the flow of the game, because you have to stop, you have to parry, then you have to attack, then you move forward a couple more steps, and there's another enemy, you parry, you attack, and you keep going.
Eventually, you just start avoiding them.
Yeah.
You start either activate lightning armor and running through them, or once you get the screw attack, you just screw through them.
Yeah, but it's kind of late into the game when you start getting those things, so you've been through a lot of these parry things by the time you get to that, and it does become annoying. And because, of course, AM2R doesn't have that, it doesn't have that level of annoyingness to it, in that, you know, most of the enemies are just, they're all traditional Metroid enemies.
You shoot them and they die. There's very few enemies in this game that don't have some sort of there's very few enemies in Samus Returns that don't have some sort of a shield or force field of some kind.
Yeah, that is true as well, because, I mean, the enemies kind of start introducing the shield and stuff, and then typically you'll find the item that penetrates it, either in that area or usually actually the next one, typically. Which is one of those odd sort of gameplay choices that they specifically introduce things that are, like, you can't attack, and so you have to find a way to either just dodge or avoid it. And it gets kind of annoying, because you're supposed to be like Samus. You're supposed to be this kind of badass. You're supposed to be able to just take on pretty much anything the game throws at you, even if you're in, like, you know, you don't have all your upgrade state. And I kind of feel that AM2R kind of got that maybe a little more than Samus Returns did.
Yeah, because there's certain enemies that even if you can't kill them perfectly, you could still find a way to defeat them fairly straightforward. Like the shielded enemies, you can't shoot them through the shield, but if you get the wave beam, then you can. But then you can shoot them from the side or above or somewhere else. But so there's, like, you can still defeat them, it's just not as easy. But then there's other cases, like in Samus Returns, where you can't even hit them at all. You just have to avoid them. Yeah. Which doesn't feel like what Samus should do. It feels... I've never liked games where the only thing you can do in the game is to avoid enemies.
Yeah.
That's why I don't like stuff like Amnesia, or even going back to stuff like Donkey Kong or Burger Time. I've never liked that in games.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of felt that, like, because Samus is supposed to be like this... She's basically a walking tank, let's be honest. That's what her power armor is. She is a walking tank.
That's not a very bad comparison.
And it's kind of the thing of where, you know, Samus should be able to just deal with more or less whatever comes her way. And it's like, avoiding should always be like a conscious choice of like, okay, I'm going to avoid this because I don't want to deal with it. Not, oh, I've got another one of these enemies I'm going to have to try to find a way to get around. You know, that should always be the difference in my mind anyway. And of course, talking about the enemies, of course, let's talk about the diversity of the enemies in these two different games. Because AM2R had a nice wide range of enemies, you know, from like basic enemy types that you can kill with a few shots, to enemies that are armored on one part, to a lot of mechanical enemies.
Yeah, and it did use a lot of the inspiration from the original Metroid 2, because there was a very wide variety of creatures in Metroid 2.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff there, and a lot of them did act very similar, but they looked visually different, and he kind of used that as a jumping off point. Well, it's like, well, if they look visually different, they can function sort of the same, but have their own kind of slant to it.
Yeah.
But then in Samus Returns, they went way overboard with just reusing the same enemies.
Yeah, again, we talked about this in the other one, but I felt like there were only about 5 or 6. There were probably more, but I felt like I was just encountering the same 5 or 6 enemies over and over again. And when you reached a new area, they just palette swap them.
They change color and they have like maybe a slightly different ability, or they're stronger.
Yeah, like, you know, they do more damage, or they take more hits before they die, and that's really it. And even towards like the end of the game, you start encountering these enemies that you can only kill using the super...
The beam rush,
Yeah, the beam rush Aeon ability. And that's just annoying.
Yeah, I've rarely... Because it is a bit of a chore to switch to the beam rush.
Yeah.
Because I usually have it on the lightning armor, but I've just found it's just activate lightning armor and just run past them, because they're usually in a stationary area.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of where AM2R does much better, is that it has a lot more diverse enemies. Every different area you go to, you feel like you're encountering new creatures. You feel like,
It's for like you're in a new ecosystem. It's like if you go to Australia, you'll see kangaroos and wallabies and stuff.
Yeah.
And then if you move to America, you'll see other stuff. You'll see like grizzly bears and shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is definitely one of the things that AM2R did better. And of course, going from the enemies, we also need to talk about the bosses in the game.
The Metroid battles are as different as night and day.
Oh god,
games.
yeah. It is kind of weird actually, because like in Samus Returns, I kind of feel like they give them almost too many like special abilities. Like if you compare the Alpha Metroids of the original game versus the Alpha Metroids of Samus Returns, they're kind of completely different.
Yeah, because the Alpha Metroids, they just kind of move around and you shoot them with missiles and they die. I haven't really fought one in a very long time that I actually found to be a threat.
Yeah, exactly. And then in Samus Returns, they suddenly, they have these abilities, like they can charge up a shield and stuff, and they can drop like energy balls at you, and they can do all these other things. And it's like, well, I'm not sure if the alphas should be doing this. They're kind of supposed to be the first step. They're not supposed to be that powerful yet. But then in AM2R, they really are. They just fly around. The one thing I will say that Samus Returns technically does better is they don't have the fucking wizard armor.
Yes, the fucking wizard armor. That was the biggest problem I had with these fucking things.
Okay, just to clarify, what we're talking about in terms of AM2R, when we say wizard armor, is if after you fought a couple of alphas, they start learning the ability to dodge. And when they're dodging, your attacks do nothing.
Even if your attack still hits them while they're dodging, it just bounces off uselessly. It's like the term comes from the South Park episode where he goes, "You can't hit me. I'm wearing wizard armor." It's
kind of a bullshit
like the kids
thing.
are playing like Let's Pretend. So it's what the kids would do is like, no, you can't hit me right now. I was dodging, or that counts as a dodge, so you didn't actually get to hit me.
Yeah, even though you technically did hit them, and it's one of the actually a few annoying things about the Metroid fights in AM2R, to be perfectly honest. And I can't remember, did Gamers dodge? I'm pretty sure it was only the Alphas.
I'm pretty sure they all did. They all dodged.
Did they all dodge? I don't remember the Zetas or Omegas dodging.
Well, they had their own things they did, but the Gammas did as well, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they don't have the wizard armor in Samus Returns. They do have a kind of shield, but at least it's an obvious shield. It's not like, oh, the Metroids decided to dodge and so you can't attack it. But I think generally, I won't say that any particular one was better. I will say that the fights
in AM2R are a bit more diverse, because in AM2R they did there was a bit of a wow factor in the sense that there were battles where they pit you up against multiple Metroids at once.
Yeah, that was actually I was going to mention that, because I can't remember, I think there's like one room where you fight 5 alphas at once.
Yeah.
And I nearly shat myself when I walked
in there.
Isn't
there one where you fight like 2 gammas?
Yeah, there's also one where you fight 2 gammas, I think. And it's underwater as well. So if you haven't got the gravity suit, it's a really fucking hard fight. But, of course, by that point in the game, you're actually starting to get bored of fighting alphas and gammas.
So they do start introducing new stuff. Samus Returns never does that. The only thing Samus Returns does is they change up the abilities sometimes. They change up what they're capable of. And also, AM2R seemed to have certain Metroids that were kind of interstitial. Like somewhere between an alpha and somewhere between a gamma. Yeah,
like when you're approaching the end of sort of the alpha section, right before they introduce the first like proper gamma, you will see like alphas that have got like, they've started growing larger claws and stuff, and that was a nice little touch. Again, you don't see that. You don't even see them change, actually, I don't think. It's just like you'll walk into a room, there's like a dead husk of an alpha, and then the gamma will show up. Even in the original Metroid, you saw the change go from one to the other to the other. You saw the first Metroid hatch into the alpha, and then the alpha sort of balloon out into the gamma, then the gamma sheds its skin.
The gamma sheds its skin and it becomes the Zeta, yeah.
Which then grows into an Omega. You don't see the Omega turn into a Queen, but obviously that's not part of the game in any of them, actually, thinking about it. But you don't get that in Samus Returns. You don't get this idea that... you do kind of get the idea that one turns into the next one, but you don't see it. Maybe they couldn't work
Right.
out how to do it in the 3D properly or something like that. Maybe
That seems like a lazy excuse.
yeah, I don't know. Or maybe they just didn't think. Maybe it would be too like disgusting or gross or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, again, I just in general, I think AM2R again kind of got it a little bit better. I will say, the Metroids felt like more of a threat in Samus Returns. Like, they fucking wail on you. You know, you will die to Metroids in Samus Returns.
I died to the ones in AM2R because they were a considerable upgrade from the original Metroid 2.
Yeah.
Probably due to the fact that we've played it so many times. But I still think they were both generally very much easier in the original because they had no iframes. You could just shoot them, and only until later on do they become a considerable threat when you can't actually shoot them from below.
Yeah, that is that is definitely true in the original. So I mean, yeah, they do take them in very different directions, and it's kind of the direction that both of the games kind of took. Like AM2R is very much traditionalist, whereas Samus Returns is very much, I guess, sort of novelty-ish. It's like, you know, what can we do that's new in that regard? So yeah, and then of course, aside from the Metroids, you've also got like non-Metroid bosses, and in this one they take a very different line. These two different games.
Yeah, because AM2R had like a considerable number of non-Metroid bosses in every area.
AM2R, I think, had 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I might have had 7. Yeah, it had like 7 or 8 or something like that. And basically every area in the game had one non-Metroid boss. And I thought it helped a good deal in terms of like diversity. It's like, okay, you know, if you're bored of fighting Metroid, you can go fight another boss, and then you can go back to the Metroids just to have something nice and fun and different. In Samus Returns, you get 3 non-Metroid bosses. One is Arachnus, which is just that was in the original game.
Yeah, so Arachnus was sort of there, but if you compare that to the original Metroid 2, we had 1.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the original Metroid 2 only had the 1. And I wouldn't even really call it a boss. It's more of just like
it's optional, yeah.
Yeah, firstly, it's optional, and secondly, it's just a really difficult enemy that you have to work out how to kill. I guess it's the closest
He's not
thing
even
to
that difficult. He's just different.
Yeah.
You don't fight him the way you would fight normal enemies.
I'm always sort of debate whether you would actually think of Arachnus as being a boss or just a really hard enemy.
I think he's been upgraded to a boss ever since you encountered him again in Fusion.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where
he's been upgraded to boss status.
Yeah,
but he is. I think he's handled much better in AM2R than he is here, because here he's just an enemy that you have to sort of kill.
He's kind of just a missile sponge, really.
Yeah, he's a damage sponge. But in AM2R, you actually have to use the bombs against him, which thematically works, because that was the only way to hurt him originally.
Yeah, and I like the bosses that are like more of a puzzle than a fight. Like you know, yeah, yes, you can attack them, but you also have to work out how to really damage them. And I think that's one of the things that Metroid has always done. And, you know, ever since like Metroid 3, where you could kill is it Dragon?
I think it's Dragon, yeah.
Yeah, with the Dragon, the underwater one, with the grapple
beam.
You know, it's always there's always been this thing of, well, yeah, maybe there are other ways to kill bosses than just spamming missiles at them.
And of course, Crocomire was also a bit of a puzzle boss.
Yeah.
We had to sort of force him back into the lava.
Yeah, yeah. But interestingly enough, they don't do that with Arachnus in Samus Returns, but they do kind of do that with the Diggernaut.
Yeah, the Diggernaut. He was very much sort of a puzzle boss.
Because you have to like avoid his attacks, especially in like the third one where you have to wait
you have to put the bombs on his face.
You put the bombs on his face, but you have to wait for it to line up. It took me a couple of goes to realize that's what it was you had to do. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong, right? I got you. And so there is that sort of element of puzzleness to it. And I like it when you take a traditional, you know, just shoot it until it dies boss and make it kind of more like a puzzle. And that's kind of one of the things I like in Metroid, well, just in Metroid in general, really.
I think Samus Returns did that because a lot of the enemies in, some of the bosses in AM2R had sort of the puzzle were more just a damage sponge, like the Tester, where you just kind of have to avoid his shots and just keep shooting him.
Yeah, I didn't like the tester.
The tester was not very fun.
No, the first
Mostly
time...
because of the room you fight him in.
Yeah, the room is really annoyingly designed. I mean, I can understand the point of it, but it's still annoying. And I always wait. Tester's always the last thing I do in that area. So yeah, the tester was annoying. But I mean, one of the bosses in AM2R is of course Ceres, which helps to tie the game into Metroid 4.
It ties into the lore.
Which was a nice little touch. It was a big surprise when this thing just suddenly shows up. It's like, oh, yeah, of course, Ceres, that's technically a thing, isn't it? And it's like, that was a nice little surprise. And I would
have loved to see Ceres in Samus Returns.
Yeah, that would have been nice to see. Because they only really tie Samus Returns to Metroid 4 at the end of the game, really. We can move on to sort of, I guess, onto like story and lore and stuff like that if you want.
Yeah.
Because Samus Returns takes a very odd stance to the lore of the franchise.
Yeah, Samus Returns I don't think handled the lore as well as AM2R.
Yeah, because it's like, I don't know, maybe they didn't like understand some of the parts of the lore, or maybe they didn't read up on it enough. But the thing that breaks the lore the most is the gateway statues.
Yeah, the Chozo seals.
Yeah, the Chozo seals that you have to pump the Metroid DNA into, which make absolutely no sense in terms of a lore standpoint. They make sense in terms of gameplay. Yes, fine, it works. But they do not make sense from a lore standpoint. Absolutely none whatsoever. If you can find me an explanation for that, I would love to hear it. Because I cannot see one. I mean, I've thought of one, but it's such a flimsy explanation, it just doesn't fit in my mind. Whereas, AM2R, even, that actually confirms a sort of headcanon theory I had about why the lava drops and the earthquakes happen. Now, my theory is that when you kill enough Metroids, the Metroid Queen basically goes into a rage because it's like she's like sensed the death.
You're killing her babies.
Yeah, you are basically killing her children. You know, and it has sensed those deaths, and the Metroid Queen is going into a rage, causing the earthquakes, and the earthquakes cause the lava to drop. Now, this makes sense in terms of Metroid 2, because it's never really... There's no real reason why it happens. In Metroid 2, it's mostly just for gameplay. But in AM2R, after you've killed the last Omega, so when there's just the Queen left, you get that earthquake, and the lava drops, and the rocks move out of the way. And if you listen really, really carefully, you can hear the Queen screaming in the background. You can actually hear it. So AM2R technically confirmed my headcanon reason for this happening, which I kind of liked. I like that. I can't remember if I specifically mentioned it in my Let's Play, but I definitely mentioned it in sort of heard it in subsequent playthroughs. And just the statues don't make sense in terms of Metroid story lore, because the Metroids were put on SR388 so that the Metroids could prevent the spread of the X parasite around the galaxy.
Yeah, the Metroids were created to fight the X.
Yeah, like specifically they were created to fight the X. So why would the Chozos put statues that kind of reward you for killing them? Like, and it doesn't make any sense. So aside from that, though, I think generally AM2R had a better grasp on the lore in general. Mostly because it actually has more lore than Samus Returns does. Samus Returns has barely no lore, but AM2R had the logbook.
It had the logbook for all the different creatures.
Had the logbook for the different creatures. It had like descriptions of each area of the game, telling you which part of the map you were now in. It explained like larger terms like the Galactic Federation and other things like that. It explained the Metroids and all their different life cycles, and it felt closer to Prime in terms of lore because of that logbook. And, it was completely optional. He didn't have to create that, but he did because one of the things that Metroid has always stood for is this idea that it has this fixed, defined lore. And it's like carved in stone. It's like that you have this Metroid Bible, and you cannot go off of the Bible unless you're Other M, in which case somehow you get a free pass. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes, exactly. There is this lore to the Metroid series, bigger lore than pretty much any other Nintendo game.
Yeah.
And it really seems like Samus Returns isn't trying to follow the lore as much as something like AM2R, because AM2R obviously came from this place of love, that he knows so much about this lore and he's trying to add to it. Whereas Samus Returns is almost like, well, this is a popular series and we like it and we want to make our own, but it doesn't really come from the place of really understanding what makes the series so great.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it also kind of smacks in terms of like, if we sort of move on now to the level design.
Design, yes.
Yeah, the level design in AM2R is almost 100% faithful to the original game. Like, they don't add in anything too new in the old areas. They do add like that in that extra fifth area that's all underwater. But again, that has like a lore explanation, because once you get to that area, you realize that all the areas you previously visited on the planet are actually part of this giant interconnected world. And it really feels like, SR388 is a place where the Chozo, they lived, they did all their stuff. You had all these different interconnected areas that you could like get to. And it felt like one giant grand world. And I didn't get that feeling from Samus Returns. From Samus Returns, I felt like each area had been developed individually, in isolation,
by like a separate team almost.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was a separate team, but it felt like
team, but a different
person was behind each one.
And even down to the fact that if you line up the map, it doesn't line up perfectly.
Yeah, I know. Which really gets on my nerves.
Which it is such a minor thing, but it seems like it would be such an easy fix.
Yeah, literally 2 blocks to the left in one area would have fixed the problem. And it's really annoying that, like, if you look at the map of AM2R, it's literally all one interconnected map. It is one giant loop. And it was exactly the same in Metroid 2, because I actually discovered that the map actually creates one unbroken loop.
Like, if you fade between the areas where it fades in and out, then you are sort of traveling sort of a 3D aspect to it. You are traveling into the almost into the foreground or background, but more or less the main tunnel itself, it has a complete unbroken loop. Yeah,
I really just got the feeling like all the areas in Samus Returns were just developed separately. And to be honest, even the scale of the areas, they felt like bigger for no real reason other than the fact that, we've got all this space, let's use it.
Which I didn't really mind the change in the scale too much, because I mean, it's more to explore. It didn't seem that it was prohibitively large.
Yeah. The other thing that's kind of odd about the level design is that when you go through AM2R, you visit each of these different areas as you slowly make your way through the map. And only once you've like fully explored the 5th area, the sort of the final area before you move towards the Metroid Hive, then they introduce the fast travel system. Whereas in Samus Returns, the fast travel system is just like, it's just there. They have these teleporter things on the planet. There's no real reason for them. They just exist.
Yeah, it just happens to be the teleporters happen to be there, right? Which again, really weird from a lore standpoint. Where these teleporters, I don't think have they had teleporters in previous games?
I think the closest thing to teleporters, I mean, you use the beams of light to teleport in Prime 3. But no, I don't. There was that one teleporter in Prime. Yeah, Prime 2. Sorry, used the light to teleport in Prime 2, and there was that one teleporter in Prime 3 when you went from Brio, when you went from the fire point to the ice area.
Right.
So technically, yes, teleporters exist, but again, it feels a little gamey. Whereas in AM2R, the teleporters are just pipes.
Yeah, the fast travel was it actually fit into the lore of this world where they have these pipes that travel between the two sections, and it shoots you out with like this blast of water.
Yeah, which again, it fits into the lore, and it fits into the idea that you're playing on one giant interconnected world, because when you activate that as well, you also start getting all these other items like dropped around, those weird sort of orbs that you have to blast in a certain way or get into a certain thing. You know what the hell I'm talking about, right? The I can't remember what the hell they're called. They're kind of energy orbs, and when you shoot them, they like explode, and your weapons stop working.
Oh yeah, like the EMP things, yeah.
Yeah, the EMP bombs. But yeah, and you use those to power things, and once you turn on the distribution center, which is the 5th area, you can then, not only do they get dropped off everywhere, which again connects all the areas up again, you can then use the pipes to get around, and it just works.
Yeah, so I guess AM2R was just a more tightly designed game.
Yeah,
it was a much more densely designed. I think it was better thought out in terms of like level progression and stuff, and how each of the worlds would work with puzzles, because there weren't that many puzzles in Samus Returns. There's a few that you solve just to get like simple power-ups, but none that you really have to do to progress.
No, progression is actually very straightforward. Most of the puzzles in Samus Returns come from just getting upgrades, I think.
And even then, once you have the special item needed to get it, you can get it.
Yeah, pretty much, usually. And of course, in terms of sort of mentioning upgrades, we could probably move on to them now, is that in both of these games' cases, actually, there's not really anything new. If anything, Samus Returns has more new in it than AM2R did.
Yeah, because you have the Aeon abilities, the Spider Spark,
and the parry.
The better use of the grapple beam, I would say.
Yeah, better use of the grapple. I mean, AM2R didn't have the grapple beam.
I mostly because it wasn't in Metroid 2, I'm guessing.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe they kind of felt the grapple beam wasn't really necessary. I mean, the only other game, 2D game at least, where the grapple beam had appeared was Metroid 3. So maybe they just felt it was kind of unnecessary. Because, I mean, once you kind of get the space jump, the grapple beam does kind of become unnecessary, although Samus Returns did do a decent job of making it important just in getting around in general, where you couldn't use the space jump.
Right.
So, yeah, that was useful. So, mostly, in terms of upgrades, both games just stick to the classics. You got the Morph Ball, you got the Spider Ball, the Ball Jump, the Bomb, the Power Bomb. I will say, it is kind of interesting how they very differently handle the Ice Beam.
Yeah, in AM2R, the Ice Beam was the final upgrade you get.
And it fucking wrecks everything. Like, you shoot something with the Ice Beam and it falls out of the air, smashes on the ground.
Which you never see in other Metroid games, which actually, normally you freeze them and they stay in midair and you can use them as a platform. Here, the Ice Beam, it just annihilates them.
Yeah, which is, it's kind of weird that you get, because usually the Ice Beam is like one of the first items you get in terms of weapon upgrades. Either that or the Charge Beam, usually. And it's like, no, the Ice Beam is the most powerful weapon you can have. And it's really, really kind of satisfying when you first get that in AM2R, to watch these enemies just fall out of the sky and smash on the floor. Or if they're underwater, to slowly float.
I mean, from a game design standpoint, I did kind of like the fact that you were forced to downgrade back to the Ice Beam once you reach the final area, because it's like, you're not here to kill enemies, you're here to kill Metroids, and as good as the other weapons are, the Ice Beam is what you need.
Yeah, in the original Metroid 2. Yeah, which I didn't get. Like, because I hadn't played the original Metroid, I didn't know first time I played Metroid 2 that the Ice Beam is needed to kill infant Metroids. And so I promptly had my ass handed to me on a silver platter at least a dozen times before I made that connection. So that was fun. But yeah, it is kind of weird that the Ice Beam is just a platform creator, which it always has been in all the other official Metroid games. And then in this fan game, it decides to turn it into just the most powerful weapon you can get. And I kind of like the latter, to be perfectly honest. I like that it's this badass thing that makes you just go, oh my god, that is so cool, when you see enemies just falling out of the air. Because you're so used to seeing them as a platform. which I think was kind of the point, maybe. You know, it wanted that sort of juxtaposition of like, no, you're thinking they're going to stay there, but they're not going to stay there. And I like that. So yeah, aside from that, all the upgrades are fairly typical, which I don't know. Does it come from a lack of imagination that we're not getting any new upgrades in these things?
I don't think so. Maybe it might be a matter of that. It might be a mixture of the fact that it is a lack of creativity, but it's also a lack of just people not wanting anything new. Because, I mean, if you look at a lot of the other Metroidvania games, how many of them even have something that's not very similar to something in Metroid?
Well, I think Super Metroid was the one that kind of laid down the base. Because kind of like Metroid 1 and Metroid 2 kind of experimented a lot. And then Metroid 3 was the one that said, okay, this is Samus. This is what she can get. And it had all her different beams because it introduced things like the Spazer.
They introduced this. Well, no, the Spazer was introduced in Metroid 2.
Yes, it was, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah, but then they introduced the grapple beam, they introduced the gravity suit, they introduced the super missiles and the super bombs.
Yeah. And beam stacking, technically.
Beam stacking, and of course, completely useless, but the ability to turn off upgrades. which you've never seen in a game since then.
Well, you can do it in AM2R. You can turn off your upgrades in AM2R. You cannot do it in Samus Returns, so there's another point. Whether you like turning off your upgrades or not.
Yeah, which it's completely pointless to do. I mean, there are a few things in Super Metroid where you can do like beam combos based on what you have selected.
I think that was why you could turn stuff off, was because of the beam combos. And the thing is, I believe they were planning to add beam combos to AM2R before it got shut down. That was like one of the things that they'd left, but were going to go and add in a later update. I believe. I don't know for a fact. I've heard that. But that's neither here nor there. That ship sailed. Mm-hmm. So just in general, I don't know why there aren't much in the way of new. If you're looking for new, the Aeon abilities in Samus Returns are pretty good. I mean, technically they're just, one is a shield, one is a really powerful weapon, one is a map system.
And the other is just the replacement for the speed booster.
Yeah, it's like an opposite replacement for the speed booster. Because that was the thing, because like Samus Returns doesn't get the speed booster, whereas of course AM2R that had the speed booster. And I know a lot of people were unsure about whether the speed booster should be like an automatic thing, or whether it should be like a hold down a button to run like it was in Super Metroid. I know that's always like bone of contention between some people, so I don't know, take that for whatever you will. What else is there to talk about? I mean, we could talk about, I suppose, briefly the graphics of the two games, because frankly I think they both look really good.
Yeah, they both look really good, but I think more for the fact, which we did talk about, is that the areas all look so unique in AM2R compared to Samus Returns, because the areas of Samus Returns look very samey. There is sort of a slow grade as you go from more ruin to more technical stuff as you get closer to the end. But beyond that, they all just kind of look very samey. Yeah, mostly. I mean, unless you're in like the large outside the ruins bit, like that huge room that every area has. Yeah, once you're inside the small, tighter rooms, you really can get lost very easily because they all look the same. Of course, you can't get that lost because you've got the mapping ability and you've got the map. But yeah, rooms look very samey. They're all the kind of they're just similar. Really, I can't think of another way to put it. They're repetitive, kind of like the enemies, really. Yeah, the enemies are repetitive, the rooms are repetitive, but it's like AM2R did a very, very good job of keeping every area different, and because then you have like the area that's like an old digging area, that's like an old mine, there's an area that was like the water treatment plant, and then the area that was the Chozo ruins. They all have different feels to them.
Yeah, and again, that was sort of, it helped to make the areas distinct, and of course that also tied into the logbook that also sort of emphasized that by saying, this area is called like the ruins, this area is called the tower, this area is called the distribution center. Each of these areas had like completely different feel to them, and you really do not get that feeling in Samus Returns.
No, unfortunately.
And it's kind of a shame, really, because they could have done it, because I kind of felt like they wanted to do that, like, because as I said, with the open large open rooms, you do kind of see there is a bit of difference. Like, one of them has the giant waterfalls in the background, one of them has just like this open cave area, and one of them has this like lots of crystals and mining in the background. And you kind of get the feeling like maybe they were going to do that, but then decided to change their mind because of AM2R, maybe.
I don't think it had anything to do with AM2R, honestly. I don't.
No, I mean, you do have to wonder how much of this game was influenced by AM2R, if at all, really. I mean, they must have known it existed. Because, I mean, either that or they were so completely oblivious to the Metroid fandom in general. I mean, I can't believe that, though. Really?
You never know, because, like, oftentimes these... Because, like, from what I understand, they did originally approach, they wanted to make their own... They wanted to make a Metroid game, and I believe they wanted to make a remake of Fusion, but they ended up doing this whole thing with the Samus Returns instead.
Yeah, which, I mean, from a Nintendo standpoint, I can understand. Because, like, Fusion is a game that's still fun to play. Like, Fusion still holds up.
I mean, personally, I would just like to see a brand new Metroid game done in this style.
What I am hoping is that if Samus Returns is successful enough, and from what I understand, it has been quite successful.
Yes, it has sold very well. It's one of the best-selling games of the week.
So, what I'm hoping is that will bolster Nintendo and say, okay, you've got this engine, give us Metroid 5. I would fucking love them to say that. Whether we will or not is another matter. Nintendo has always been very cagey about Metroid games. But I'm hoping that, you know, if this is a success, and then maybe the success of Prime 4, you know, much like they did with Fusion and then Zero Mission, maybe we'll get a new Metroid game using this engine, which I would love to see. Because the engine is great.
Yeah, because I would like them to see the next chapter in the game, or even if it is like an interstitial. Like, I'm excited for Metroid Prime 4 because it's not a remake of something that we've seen before. It's a new game, even if it doesn't happen later in the story. Even if it doesn't happen after Fusion, I still want to know what hell happens after Fusion. But I want more from this series, which is why this series is so popular, and why part of why this series is so popular is we want to see what happens next. We want to see more of this universe. And I felt like the ones who made AM2R behind that understood that better than the people who made Samus Returns.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird. Like, I think I said this before, but it's like AM2R comes from a place of like love, if you will, like fan love.
AM2R comes from a place of love. Samus Returns comes from a place of like.
Yeah, if that, really. I mean, I don't know. You do kind of get this feeling that like the studio that made, I want to say it's called Mercury Studio. I think that's
Mercury Steam.
Mercury Steam. That maybe they didn't understand Metroid as well as maybe they thought they did, or maybe they just didn't understand it at all. But it does fail. I mean, I'm not saying that Samus Returns is a bad game or it doesn't understand anything to do with Metroid. It's a very competent Metroid game in and of itself, but and we talked about this during the main review, there are a lot of little niggles in this game.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things that add up, which, although in its defense, I did play through Samus Returns twice. I haven't done the same to AM2R.
You haven't played it twice?
No, I didn't play it twice. I didn't play it again. Doesn't it have a hard mode as well?
Yeah, it's got an easy and normal and a hard mode.
Yeah, I only played through it the one time. I tried to play through it a second time, but I felt that maybe it didn't flow as well as Samus Returns.
You think?
The levels themselves, I think they didn't have the right kind of flow. There's a lot of like trying to find the right way to go to continue on, which I didn't get that same sense from Samus Returns. I felt that Samus Returns flowed a lot better. I did play through it twice.
Yeah, I can see that, but I think in a way that kind of comes from the kind of the indie market, from where it came from. Because I mean, technically, AM2R, it is an indie game.
Yeah.
You know, if you know, you got like Samus Returns is like a AAA game, and AM2R is very much an indie game, and you can always see the difference in the design philosophy between indie games and AAA games. And I think that is definitely exemplified if you look at AM2R versus Samus Returns.
Yeah, because AM2R, it was made for fans of the series. Samus Returns was made for everybody.
Yeah. And I think that is definitely true, because it is that, like, you know, as you said earlier, Samus Returns, it has things like easy tutorials. It has things like... I was going to say it has a better progression. I don't think the progression in AM2R is bad.
No, I don't think the progression in either of them is very terrible.
Although I suppose thinking about it, it's hard to say how it would feel to someone who hasn't played Metroid 2 before, because we have both played Metroid 2 to death.
Yeah, we've played Metroid 2 to death. We know it backwards and forwards.
We know, like, how Metroid 2 is supposed to go. So even the differences in AM2R and Samus Returns, they don't really throw us off. We know how the game is supposed to go. We know sort of roughly what's supposed to happen. So it is hard to judge how someone who hasn't played the original Metroid 2 might feel about it. But yeah, I think both games flow well enough. So I think that's pretty much anything. Anything else you can think of we might have missed?
No, we didn't really say which of the two games we think is better, because we mostly want to leave that up to the listener.
Yeah, so we're not going to say... I mean, honestly, personally, I love a world where both of these two games can exist.
Yeah. I don't think we should be forced to choose between the games. It's like when people say which is... It's like when they think that Star Trek and Star Wars, you have to choose one. It's like, why?
Yeah,
why
exactly.
do you have to choose one when you can have both?
But we also know that Metroid fans are nothing if not opinionated. Right. So we are not going to actually say which one we think is better. We are going to leave that decision to you. Please leave a comment, if you are so inclined, saying which game you think is better, if it is one or the other, if you like both, if you like neither, because that is entirely possible. I have heard that there are people who just think that Metroid 2 in general is a bad idea because it's too linear, and you know it's generally the people who also don't like fusion, I think.
Right.
Who definitely prefer the more open worldness of, say, Metroid 3 versus the more linear of Metroid 2 or Metroid Fusion. Which, again, perfectly understandable. You're entitled to your opinion. I like most Metroid games. I was going to say I like all Metroid games then, but I realized I don't quite like all the Metroid games. But, yeah, so thank you for listening to us going on. Please, as I said, leave a comment so you can subscribe to my channel. If you are interested in a sort of probably long-winded but ultimately pure review of Samus Returns by itself, as I said before, you can click the link in the description to see the video that's up on Zero's channel. There will also be an end card at the end of this video, so please feel free to leave a comment on both videos. You can leave the same comment if you want. We're good friends, so we'll probably be comparing notes and views and all sorts of other things like that. So aside from that, thank you for listening, everybody. Goodbye.
And take care. Bye.